It's NHL playoff bracket time. Okay, yes, I know the playoffs already started last night, so I promise I'm not just doing this a day late to try and get one night's worth of games cheat on who's probably going to win some of these series. Which, as we'll find out, is definitely not where this bracket is headed. I did also make a bracket based on who I actually think is going to win, or a combination of who I think and hope is going to win each series throughout the playoffs, that might actually be a little bit controversial, so if you want to see that, we can look at that at the end. But the bracket that we're going to be looking at and actually making over the course of this video is one specifically about what the best outcome over these playoffs would be for Seattle hockey fans. So once again, this is not influenced at all by the outcome of the first night's worth of games, and as we're going to see, it's not terribly likely to actually end up happening. It just seemed like a fun thing to put together, and for any Seattle hockey fans who still want to watch other series other than the Kraken playing the Avalanche and don't have any rooting interest but still want a team to root for, maybe this can inform you as to who to root for throughout these playoffs. With that, let's get right to it. And we might as well start with the first series on the western side, the Kraken versus the Avalanche, and I think we all know where that one's going. Obviously, Seattle fans going to be rooting for the Kraken there. But as we do move on now to the next series with Dallas facing Minnesota, this is where things get a little bit less obvious as to where a Seattle hockey rooting interest might come in. And for one thing, I'm not really taking into consideration how easy of a path different teams winning could make it for Seattle to get to and win a Stanley Cup. Because, let's face it, even if it's the Jets that make it to the conference final to face the Kraken, or one of the wildcard teams in the East making it to the Cup final, by the time they've made it to a conference or Cup final, they've clearly played well enough and beat good teams to get there that that's not going to be an easy matchup anyway. So then, when it comes to Dallas and Minnesota, with this being the next potential matchup if the Kraken do beat the Avalanche, already neither one of these is going to be a particularly easy matchup. So then, what it comes down to is that, well, Minnesota has one ex-Kraken player in Marcus Johansson, so what the heck, let's cheer for an old Kraken. I'm giving this one to the Wild. And as you can see, we already have two upsets now, so again, probably not the most likely bracket to actually end up happening, even with the Wild winning game one of that series, especially considering as we move on now down to the Golden Knights facing the Jets, that's a trend that's only going to continue because, well, you might think that Kraken fans would be cheering for the Golden Knights to win that series because Seattle has Winnipeg's second round pick and you want that pick to be as high up as possible. Well, it turns out that for whatever reason, a team only has to lose in one of the first two rounds to get their normal spot in that draft order based on the standings at the end of the season. So the Jets can still lose in the second round and the Kraken will still get that pick in the same spot it would be if they had lost in the first round. And since the Jets have another ex-Kraken in Mason Appleton, we'll have the Jets winning that series. And yes, I know there's going to be T-Birds fans out there who are going to say, wait a second, what about some old T-Birds players like Keegan Colasar or Shea Theodore who play for the Golden Knights? That could be a reason to cheer for them. True, but don't forget Brendan Dillon, who plays for the Jets, also used to play for the T-Birds. So you got an ex-T-Bird and an ex-Kraken on the same team, might as well just stick with the Jets. Plus, we just like seeing Golden Knights lose. Then up next, when it comes to the Kings and Oilers, well, technically speaking, it would be slightly better for the Kraken if the Kings were to win the series, strictly from the standpoint of the Kings have more to lose draft order-wise if they were to make it to the conference final than the Oilers do. It's really not a big difference in the drop the Kings would make in that draft order versus the one the Oilers would make. And ultimately, the difference of a few spots in the first round of one of their opponents probably doesn't make a huge difference to the Kraken. Well, it's not just the first round, it's all the rounds, but still, ultimately, it's not a big enough difference to overcome the fact that the Oilers have the only two Washington-born players in the NHL playoffs at the moment, in Kyler Yamamoto and Derek Ryan, both of whom were born in Spokane, so I'm going with the Oilers to win this series. Ah, yes, the number of games for each series. Well, I suppose maybe this is the one point where we could go for making the Kraken path to the Stanley Cup a little bit easier. So we'll say the Kraken only have to play the 4 games and the rest of them have to play 7, just so every team is good and beat up a little bit more than the Kraken when Seattle ends up playing them. And obviously that moves us over to the eastern side of things, where admittedly there's a little bit less to go on when it comes to reasons to root for or against teams, especially with draft order and that kind of stuff, but we can still find some things. One of the harder series for this, I will admit, is this Boston versus Florida one. Really, the only thing I could come up with here is that Radko Gudas for the Panthers played for the Everett Silvertips, so we'll go Panthers there. Again, really hurting our chances of this bracket having too much realism. Up next, we have Toronto versus Tampa Bay, and this is another situation where we have a team that has a draft pick in Seattle's hands, Seattle having Toronto's second round pick. But again, like we went over with the Jets, the Leafs can still lose in the second round, and that draft pick will still be waiting in the same spot as it would otherwise for the Kraken. And while the Lightning do have one ex-Kraken player in Hayden Fleury, the Leafs have two in the old captain Mark Giordano, as well as Calle Jarnkrok. So I'm going to go with the Leafs here, and Leafs fans can rejoice after getting at least out of the first round for the first time in, well, since 2004, so basically forever. With the Hurricanes and Islanders, I am tempted to go Hurricanes here just because of all of the ties that the Seattle organization as a whole has back to the Hurricanes. Obviously Ron Francis, and even up in the broadcast booth with John Forsland. But in the end, I am going to end up going Islanders here, pretty much because, well, the biggest ex-Thunderbird star of all in the NHL is Barzal, and I mean, yeah, we're going Islanders here pretty much just because of Barzal. And finally, for the first round, and admittedly, again, we're splitting hairs a bit here when it comes to finding a Seattle interest in this one. While I would be tempted to just pick the Rangers because it would be fun to see the Rangers and Islanders in a series, there is the tie of the ex-Kraken and Nathan Bastian. He might not have played that long for the Kraken and didn't particularly seem to enjoy his time here because he got scratched too much, but he's an ex-Kraken, so what the heck, we'll throw him into the second round. Again, we'll just go 7 for all of them, make them all nice and tired by the time they reach the Cup final. Plus, I mean, who doesn't want to watch more hockey, and lots of Game 7s definitely give us that. Then we move on to the second round where, again, obviously the Kraken are moving on because that's why we're here. Also, by the way, one other small perk of the Kraken beating the Avs is that Seattle has Colorado's 4th round pick, so it's a little deeper in the draft, but the Kraken could make that 4th round pick a little bit better by just knocking the Avalanche out. Anyway, they're moving on past the Wild here in the second round, and then with the Jets and Oilers, again, at this point we do need the Jets to lose, so that second round pick stays where it's at. So the Oilers, even though if this was really what ended up happening, I would not like this matchup for the Kraken in the conference final because, well, the Oilers ended the season so hot that if they made it to this point, I would definitely be nervous about this matchup. Still, we're not here for reality, we're here for what's best for Seattle hockey, and this is it. Then, moving on to the eastern side, again, at this point, we need Toronto to lose for that second round pick to stay where it is. With the Islanders and Devils, normally I would give the advantage to the team with the ex-Kraken player over the ex-WHL player. Thunderbirds in this case, obviously with Barzal, but again, Bastian didn't play very long with the Kraken, and Matthew Barzal is one of the more notable T-Birds ever, so we're going with Barzal there. So that then brings us to the conference finals where, again, whole reason we're here, Seattle's moving on past Edmonton. And then maybe this is tipping my hand a bit to my preference between the Thunderbirds and Silvertips. I went to some T-Birds games as a kid, and while I don't have a huge rooting interest one way or the other between the two, I'm definitely giving this one to Matthew Barzal. And obviously, with the Stanley Cup final, again, the whole reason for this whole thing in the first place, Kraken win it. And as far as the tiebreaker here for total goals, 32. Why not? So there you have it. The Kraken are the 2023 Stanley Cup champs and get plenty of help along the way as far as draft picks in the right spots and entertainment from ex-Kraken players or guys from Washington or that played in Washington at some point. And I suppose since I said we could look at my actual bracket, we can go ahead and do that. So, yes, right off the bat, I do have the Kraken winning that first round. Again, if I had to bet on it, I'd probably say the Avalanche in 6 or 7, but I did mix a little bit of what I want to happen into this bracket. It's not entirely what I think would happen necessarily. I do have the Stars winning this round. Vegas, I just don't understand why so many people are picking the Jets to upset there. Obviously, it's possible, but I think Vegas wins that one. Edmonton, I think this is going to be quite the battle here for Edmonton against LA. Definitely a 6 or 7 game series to me. But I already know a lot of people are looking at this Stanley Cup final I have and thinking, what in the heck? How did we get here? One of them being Edmonton, because I know a lot of people are going Boston versus Edmonton for the final. I don't believe in Edmonton. It's the defense and goaltending again. I just don't think are trustworthy enough to make another deep run, especially to the Stanley Cup. And I know they made it to the conference final last year, so they certainly could make it at least that far this season. Plus, the team that I have them losing to in the Golden Knights certainly has their questions in net as well. But I just feel like LA beats up Edmonton enough in that series, and the Vegas Golden Knights probably get through the Jets. I don't know. It's probably a close series, but again, I don't believe in the Oilers. They had to lose at some point, and well, maybe they make it to the conference final and lose to the Stars. I just don't see them in the Cup final. Meanwhile, on the Eastern side of things, I don't know. Boston probably does make it to the Cup final, if we're being perfectly honest, but I just don't want them to. And I do think that Carolina, as long as they can get things rolling here in this first round and make it through the Islanders, this is a team that is one of the most well-rounded in the entire NHL. We saw it throughout the course of the season, and yeah, they kind of started to stumble a bit towards the end, but they still won the division, and I think are still one of the best teams as far as roster construction is concerned. Plus, they are the best team defensively in the NHL over the course of the season. Bruins right there as well. So that would certainly be an interesting Eastern final there. And obviously, I have the Hurricanes beating the Stars in the final here. Two of the most well-rounded teams in the NHL between the Stars and Canes. Bruins, honestly, are probably the most well-rounded team in the entire NHL. But like I said, again, there's a little bit of mix of what I want to have happen here. And I just don't want to see Marchand lifting another cup. So that's how we ended up with Carolina beating the Stars. I definitely can't say that I'm the most confident about this particular bracket, and I know there's some spicy takes in there, but well, what the heck, there it is. Anyway, that's going to pretty much do it for this one. So let me know down in the comment section what you thought of this video. Did it seem like a fun idea to you? I don't know. Again, it's not terribly likely to happen. In fact, this is probably one of the least likely ways the playoffs are going to end up going, but seemed like an entertaining way to see what other rooting interests could be out there other than the obvious with whatever games the Kraken play. Again, we'll be doing R&Rs after each of those games, and the road games, for at least most of them, will be streaming. Certainly the first two on the road against Colorado, which are the only two guaranteed ones, and then we'll go from there. Otherwise, if you have made it to this point, thank you very much for sticking with me through this one. If you did like or enjoy this video, there are buttons for that kind of stuff down below to help support the channel, so I'd appreciate you using them. Until next time, this first playoff game for the Kraken. Stay safe out there. Be good to each other. God bless and go Kraken.